Tom Herman has shown no signs of life. Baylor, post-Art Briles has shown no signs of life. ISU, Iowa State, Army should be easy wins, even though Army has improved greatly. I don't think they're going to be at Oklahoma's level. So you look at the schedule for them, and I don't think until you get to the TCU game there really is a challenge facing Oklahoma. Now, whether or not that helps them or hurts them as far as if it's close or they have one loss against them as far as making the college football playoff, who's to say? But you look at strength of schedule, that's not going to help their cause if it's close for one of those last four spots and they come in with a loss.
And, Matt, I'm glad you brought Texas up, because I was just going to ask you, what in the world is going on down at Texas? So, does Maryland just have their number, I'm guessing? Shouldn't they just be a little farther along since Tom Herman's supposed to be, their guy? I mean, is that Ellington that he started at quarterback?
Well, considering Maryland's in an even bigger mess than Texas is, this should have been a slam dunk for Texas.
Yeah, with what they've dealt with.
You look at this, there's no reason why Texas should have lost that game on Saturday. No reason.
Tom, what do you think about Texas so far?
I am curious. I am a suspect at least. I would think, okay, if it was another strong Big 12 team or something that beat them, but it's Maryland. I mean, that's like Rutgers. I say Rutgers because they haven't earned the S yet.
It's like it's crazy because Maryland's one of those teams that don't belong in the Big Ten, in my opinion, but they can beat Texas. So maybe I'm wrong.
Well, like you said, maybe it's Tom Herman. It's I don't know, but I think if we look back and if we're asking who's going to have the better season, Texas is clearly going to have the better season. If we're looking back and we're asking who's going to be in a bowl game, Texas has a better shot of being in a bowl game. But yeah, you summed it up. They've got their number. Who knows why? Maybe it's a mental thing. Who knows? But Tom Herman can't be happy about getting beat by a bunch of turtles. Turtle.
Matt, maybe,
turtle.
I don't know if it's as much that as the fact, like we said, Maryland is an absolute mess. There's still questions of what DJ Durkin's going to be the coach. I mean, you talk about disoriented clubs right now. That's Maryland all over the place right now. It's not Texas. It's Maryland. So how Maryland ended up winning that game, that's a huge red flag if you're a fan of Texas and you're looking for something from Tom Herman. You are really questioning the hire of bringing him in from Houston at this point based on that loss.
Matt, with this stuff with Urban Meyer the past few weeks, do you think some of that leaked in to you? Obviously, Tom Herman was brought up and all this. Do you think some of that leaked in and was a distraction these past couple weeks?
It shouldn't have been, considering who they played. I mean, if Ohio State blows away Oregon State with a little difficulty, Texas should have done the same thing to Maryland. I don't understand the situation here, but to me, this should have been an easy win for the Horns, and they end up with another embarrassing loss. So I don't think it's anything as far as a bleed in or a bleed out or whatever the case is. The fact of the matter is Texas is losing to teams they should not be losing to. And, again, if this was even a Maryland that didn't have the issues with DJ Durkin, this is a game they should have won.
Right. And you bring up Ohio State and their blowout win against Oregon State, which I don't think they needed Urban Meyer for that anyway. Obviously they didn't. They had Ryan Day, and we just talked about the Lane Kiffin talk, getting another job at a bigger program. Do you think these three games for Ryan Day and Ohio State looks great the way they did in Week 1? Do you think Ryan Day's name is going to come up in the coaching carousel, Tom, for next year?
Well, if they give Urban Meyer the boot, the thing is, though, that league gives them one option to replace Urban Meyer. I think Ryan Day, now granted, it's just one game, but you look at the scenarios right there, I think you have to say he is warranted for a look just in case they do part ways with Urban Meyer down the road. And who knows, maybe he stays at Ohio State, guarantee that he will be the next coach if and when they part ways with Urban Meyer, if they do that.
Tom?
Well, we'll say this Urban Meyer story just is like an Indian nickel that never goes away, that just keeps popping up. I mean, certainly,
it's
they got a
football plate game.
Yeah, certainly they got a win against Oregon State. I don't think that's a big surprise. I think there's going to be the talk. It's maybe going to be more so that Urban Meyer parts company with Ohio State than Ohio State parts company with Urban Meyer. But at best, I think we're a 60-40 shot that he'll be there next year, and 40% being that he won't be there. So, that he will be there. So, I think there's a 60% shot that he won't be there next year.
He's going to the Browns, right? 60% chance you're giving him to be the coach of the Cleveland Browns.
Or the Bengals.
Maybe. All right, so we saw Clemson. A lot of scoreboard. You thought that you knew Clemson was going to do that. There was a little bit of a quarterback controversy there with Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence does come in. He looks real good, but this is Kelly Bryant's team, and I don't think we're going to see Trevor Lawrence much this weekend when the Clemson takes on Texas A&M. I think this is a good, strong test for Clemson early to see what they really have for defense. I think they might be them and Alabama, obviously, are probably the best defensive teams in the country, but they take on Texas A&M with Jimbo Fisher, head coach, and Mike Elko, who's the hottest D coordinator right now in the country. So my thoughts really are, I just think this is going to be a blowout win for Clemson, even though Jimbo Fisher is familiar with Clemson, obviously, formerly being the head coach at Florida State. But Matt, what are your thoughts on Clemson and Texas A&M?
Texas A&M is a work in progress at this point. I don't think it's going to be Rome being built in one day for them right now, even though they did fork out a truckload of cash to bring in both Jimbo and Elko. I still think that, the cupboard's a little bit bare, and I think it has been since, dare we say, when Johnny Manziel left. And it's tough to make up for it in just coaching savvy alone. And you look at the scenarios right there, you got a super coach in Dabo Swinney and that staff at Clemson, and you look at the scenarios as far as involved, and I just don't see where Texas A&M gives much of a game for Clemson, even though that game is in College Station.
So, Tom, the hot topic in college football right now is obviously Jim Harbaugh being overrated. Do you think Jimbo Fisher is a little overrated?
Well, Texas didn't seem to think so. So Texas A&M, didn't seem to think so. Yeah, I think he should have stayed with Florida State. I think that he disappointed his fans. I think that him chasing the money was a big stab in the back, and maybe what they say, karma's a bitch. So, yeah, I do. I think he's very overrated.
Well,
Matt,
of course, though, you can also look at the scenario on that and say, well, it's justified that he left, considering how poorly they played against Va Tech, that he saw, the writing on the wall that this was not a winning scenario, and maybe he's justified. But like I said, he's got to have to show something decent against Clemson here, and I just don't think they're going to be able to deliver it against a team that I think in Texas A&M is still mid-pack in the SEC at best, and that's a big if, considering they are in the same division as Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and all these other fireballs in that Western Division.
And staying in the SEC, we'll talk about the game between Georgia and South Carolina. I think this has the makings of actually being a close game, considering it's weird to think about it because how great Georgia was last year, but South Carolina's not that bad either. And Will Muschamp got another chance after the failed experiment at the University of Florida. He actually looks pretty good at South Carolina. And I think this is going to be a Georgia win, but it's going to be closer what the experts think. I don't even know what the experts think right now, but I think it's just going to be about a touchdown game. So, Tom, what are your thoughts on Georgia and South Carolina?
I think South Carolina is going to win. I really do. I am not a big Bulldog fan.
Hit that breaking news music.
I lost it. Yeah, I do. It might end up being a hot take, but we'll see.
Yeah, definitely. Georgia's in a lot of people's top four. They're not in mine. The they're going to lose later this year. I don't think it's going to be their loss. But, Matt, what are your thoughts on Georgia, South Carolina?
This is not the game where Georgia loses the load here. You talk about Lane Kiffin being bad. I think Will Muschamp is heading down the same slippery slope here with some of the comments he's made on certain things and the way he's handled certain things, especially the way he handled things at Florida. I don't understand the hire that South Carolina was going for by bringing him in. I think there were some other better candidates that they could have stuck with, but ultimately they went with Muschamp. We'll see how it works out, but I don't think he's the coach that's going to get them over the hump compared to, if you're going to compare him to the levels that they achieved with Spurrier as the head coach.
Yeah, I'm just with you. I just think it'll be Georgia's loss. I think Georgia's loss is actually going to come in the SEC championship game, and that's why they're not going to be in the top 4. That's just too late of a loss. I see championship games being pointless myself.
The game at Auburn is going to be the undoing for Georgia. I just don't see them beating Auburn and Auburn, considering how good they looked against Washington.
And then another big game this weekend, one that hits closer to home for us because we're here in Indiana, is actually Team Notre Dame is going to play against both teams, the Stanford-USC. And I think it's pretty cool that they play this game early every year. I see USC being down this year. For some reason, there's a hump that Todd Helton at USC just can't quite get over. And I think Stanford is going to have their number this year. I think Stanford wins a close game. Tom, what are your thoughts on that?
I'm all about Stanford this year. I really think Stanford is going to be the team to watch in the West, and we want to see Washington do some good things, but I think the team that when the dust clears, the team that's still standing is going to be the Trees.
And, Matt, do you think that Bryce Love is still the Heisman front runner? Because he had a really slow start this past week.
I don't think he's the front runner. Now, granted, I think it's premature to say who the front runner is after just 1 week. I think you're maybe talking 5, 6, 7 down the road before we start talking about Heisman, but that's just me. But you look at USC, this could get real ugly for them over the next 3 weeks because if Texas gets their act together, that game looks bad. And then, of course, you got to deal with Mike Leach and Washington State. They could easily go 1-3 in this run, and then you got Arizona to worry about as well. I mean, there is a lot of potential messy scenarios here for USC. I mean, granted, they beat UNLV, but not convincingly. You look at the scenarios, the next 4 weeks for USC could get pretty ugly for them if they're not careful.
Right, and then they finish on Thanksgiving weekend with Notre Dame, so we're talking about 5 or 6 losses for USC this year, which is really unheard of because you think USC, you still think of the Pete Carroll years and how dominant they were, and a 5 to 6 loss USC team is just unheard of, Tom.
Well, they're the only school in Southern California. How many times do I have to say that? No, I absolutely
they might
agree with you.
Competing with UCLA with the terrible
I loved
season.
how you got that hot take in there that they're going to lose to Notre Dame. Just threw that in there.
Oh, that's
just
right. It's the only one of the few shows with well, if you listen to Clay Travis, he's biased with Tennessee, so I'm that way with the Irish,
Sure. Well, here's the thing. I love Clay Travis, that's for sure. What I would say is, though, USC is not the USC of Pete Carroll. And maybe they're living in a former life, in a former shell, if you will. But, yeah, they've got some work to do.
Well, what this shows, Rick and Tom, is just how tight the margin of error is because everything is so close in these Power 5 conferences that if even you slip even just a tiny little bit, whether it's 1/100th of an inch or a 1/1,000,000th of an inch, you can go from sitting pretty to sitting pretty bad real quick. And you got to be careful on these situations when you have a slip up that it doesn't explode into, from a little tiny grape to a grapefruit in just a few seconds, because that's what can happen if you miss it by just a little bit. I mean, case in point, Notre Dame's 4-8 season, for instance.
So, Matt, what could it be at USC? Is it coaching? Because USC and just where they're located and the tradition, everything USC holds, the program, the football program kind of just sells itself to these top 4 and 5-star athletes. So how come that just over the past few years hasn't really translated to a lot of wins on the field? Is Clay Helton just not who we thought he would be at head coach?
Helton looked iffy. I think during the Sarkisian era they looked iffy.